28-year-old pastor lay dying in a pool of blood inside his own church. His killer would spend the next 14 years claiming the wrong man sat on death row. March 3, 2011. North Point Baptist Church, Arlington, Texas. Pastor Clint Dobson arrives for evening service. Within hours he's dead. A 69-year-old church secretary lies beaten unconscious. The sanctuary desecrated. Lawayne Nelson, age 24. Arrested. Convicted. Sentenced to die. But here's what haunts this case: Nelson never wavered. Not once in 14 years behind bars. "I didn't do this," he told anyone who'd listen. His wife believed him. Activists rallied. Appeals flooded the courts. The evidence that convicted him? Some say a jury never saw the full picture. Others called it airtight. February 5, 2025. Nelson's final day arrives. His last meal request? Denied. Texas doesn't do that anymore. His wife brings their dog to witness what comes next. The truth dies with the condemned, or does it? March 3, 2011. The parking lot at North Point Baptist Church sits nearly empty. Most congregants have gone home after Wednesday evening service. Pastor Clint Dobson's white Honda Civic remains in its usual spot. Inside the building, fluorescent lights hum over burgundy carpets and wooden pews. Dobson, 28 years old, newly married, beloved by his congregation. A man who dedicated his life to serving others. Tonight, that dedication would cost him everything. If Clint Dobson had left 5 minutes earlier, would he still be alive today? Church Secretary Judy Elliott, 69, methodical in her routines. She stayed late that Wednesday, finishing administrative work in her office. Filing bulletins. Organizing Sunday school materials. The kind of mundane tasks that keep churches running smoothly. Two lives intersecting with violence in a place meant for peace. The official timeline reads like a police report. Clinical. But behind those timestamps lived breathing people with families, dreams, futures that would be shattered before the clock struck. Dobson walks through the church's main entrance. Security cameras capture his familiar silhouette. He carries his briefcase, wearing the same navy suit he'd preached in hours earlier. His wedding ring catches the hallway light. A figure appears on the church's exterior cameras. Moving with purpose toward the building's side entrance. The image quality is grainy, but investigators would later claim this was Lawayne Nelson. Nelson, 24 years old. A man whose life had already taken several wrong turns. Multiple arrests for theft. Drug possession. The kind of rap sheet that tells a story of choices leading nowhere good? But murder? That was different territory entirely. The sequence of events inside the church becomes murky. No cameras in the sanctuary. No witnesses to what happened next. Only the aftermath would tell the story. Investigators would later piece together a narrative. Nelson entered seeking money. Found Dobson in the church office. Demanded cash. When the pastor couldn't produce enough, violence erupted. The question that would haunt courtrooms for over a decade: was Nelson really the man in those grainy security images? What we know for certain is this: Pastor Clint Dobson fought for his life. Blood spatter patterns on the office walls told investigators he didn't die quickly or quietly. Multiple stab wounds. Defensive injuries on his hands. A man who refused to surrender without a battle. Judy Elliott heard the commotion from her office down the hall. She investigated. Found herself face to face with an intruder. The attack was swift and brutal. Blunt force trauma to her head left her unconscious, bleeding on the church floor. But Elliott survived. And survival meant witness testimony. A passerby notices the church's front door standing wide open. Unusual for that time of night. A welfare check becomes a homicide scene in minutes. Paramedics arrive to chaos. Dobson lies dead in his office, surrounded by overturned furniture and scattered papers. Elliott clings to consciousness, her testimony crucial to what comes next. "I saw his face," she would later tell investigators. "I'll never forget those eyes." The manhunt begins immediately. Arlington police canvass the neighborhood. Interview church members. Process the crime scene for DNA, fingerprints, any physical evidence that might lead to a suspect. Nelson's name surfaces within 48 hours. His criminal history. His proximity to the church. Witness testimony placing him in the area that evening. The arrest comes on March 7, 4 days after Dobson's murder. Nelson sits in an Arlington jail cell, maintaining his innocence from the moment handcuffs click shut. "That I didn't kill nobody," he tells detectives during interrogation. "You got the wrong man." But evidence tells a different story. Or so prosecutors claim. Judy Elliott identifies Nelson in a police lineup. Security footage allegedly shows his vehicle in the church parking lot. DNA evidence found at the scene. The case seems airtight. Open and shut. Justice moving swiftly toward its inevitable conclusion. Nelson's defense team argues differently. They question the timeline, challenge the witness identification, suggest alternative suspects who were never properly investigated. Did police rush to judgment, or did they catch a killer red-handed? The trial unfolds in Tarrant County. Emotional testimony from Dobson's widow. Medical examiner reports detailing the pastor's injuries. Elliott's harrowing account of the attack she barely survived. Nelson sits stone-faced throughout proceedings. His family fills the gallery, convinced of his innocence. Dobson's loved ones seek justice for a man taken too soon. 12 jurors weigh the evidence. Deliberations stretch across multiple days. When they return, the verdict echoes through the courtroom: guilty of capital murder. The sentence: death. Nelson shows no emotion as the judge speaks those words. But his mother weeps in the gallery. His sister shakes her head in disbelief. From that moment forward, Nelson would spend his days in a 6-by-10-foot cell on Texas death row. 14 years of appeals. 14 years of proclaimed innocence. 14 years of a man insisting the system had failed. Prison records show a different side of Steven Nelson. No violent incidents behind bars. Model prisoner behavior. Guards describe him as quiet, respectful, always maintaining his innocence to anyone who'd listen. Letters to his family reveal a man grappling with his fate. "I didn't do this," he wrote repeatedly. God knows the truth. His wife, Helene, never wavered in her support. Visits every month. Phone calls twice weekly. A woman who married a man on death row, convinced justice had miscarried. As February 2025 approached, Nelson's legal options dwindled. Final appeals denied. Clemency petitions rejected. The machinery of capital punishment grinding toward its inexorable conclusion. 14 years after Pastor Clint Dobson drew his last breath, would Steven Nelson join him in death, innocent or guilty? The answer would come in less than 24 hours. February 5, 2025. The fluorescent lights bust to life in Cell 12 Building F, Polunsky Unit. Steven Lawayne Nelson opens his eyes knowing this sunrise will be his last. The same concrete walls. The same steel bars. The same 6-by-10 space that's been his world for 14 years. Today that world ends at. When a man counts his final hours in single digits, does breakfast taste different? Officer Martinez slides the tray through the meal slot. Scrambled eggs, congealed and lukewarm. 2 pieces of white toast. Grape jelly packets. Orange juice in a small carton. The exact meal served to 260 other death row inmates this Tuesday morning. No last meal request awaits Nelson. Texas abolished that tradition after Lawrence Russell Brewer's 2011 spectacle ordering 2 chicken fried steaks, a triple cheeseburger, cheese omelet, fried okra, barbecue beef, pizza, ice cream and peanut butter fudge. Brewer ate nothing. Wasted it all. Now condemned inmates get standard prison food on execution day. Democracy in death. Nelson eats methodically. Eggs first. Toast second. Drains the orange juice completely. 14 years of prison routine doesn't break just because the calendar stops today. 6:30 a.m. shower call. Clean clothes delivered to his cell, not prison whites but civilian attire. Blue jeans. White cotton t-shirt. White tennis shoes. The outfit he'll wear to meet death. They dress condemned men in civilian clothes for their final walk. Makes them look human in those last moments. Makes the witnesses forget they're watching a prisoner die. If changing clothes changes how we see death, what does that say about justice? Down the cell block, whispered voices carry news. Death row operates on information networks built from desperation and solidarity. Everyone knows when someone's number comes up. "Stay strong, Steven," calls a voice from cell 8. Nelson nods silently. Saves his words for when they matter most. At 8 a.m. sharp, prison officials begin execution preparations. Warden Rodriguez reviews the signed death warrant one final time. No last-minute appeals filed overnight. No stays pending in federal court. The legal machinery has reached its terminus. The execution team assembles in the administrative building. Medical personnel who'll insert 4 lines into Nelson's arms. Security officers who'll escort him from cell to gurney. The unnamed executioner who'll press the button releasing pentobarbital into his bloodstream. This is routine for everyone except the man about to die. 9:15 a.m. brings Nelson's spiritual advisor. Chaplain Williams has counseled dozens through their final hours. A quiet man who listens more than he preaches. "How are you feeling today, Stephen?" "Like a man who's been telling the truth for 14 years, Nelson replies. Nobody wants to hear it anymore. They pray together. Not for miracles. Nelson stopped believing in divine intervention years ago, but for peace. For understanding. For forgiveness in a world that seems to have forgotten mercy exists alongside justice. The prison hums with controlled activity. Media representatives check credentials at the main gate. Protesters gather on the road outside, some holding innocence signs, others demanding justice for Pastor Dobson. Inside Building F, normal routines continue with surreal normalcy. Count time at 10 a.m. Medical checks. Property inventory. The bureaucracy of death proceeding on schedule. 11:30 a.m. Lunch arrives. Salisbury steak. Mashed potatoes. Green beans. Dinner roll. Chocolate cake slice. Nelson eats half, pushes the tray aside. His appetite disappeared somewhere between dawn and noon. The afternoon stretches ahead like a countdown timer. Final visit scheduled for 2 p.m. Last phone calls permitted until 4 p.m. Final written statement due by 5:30 p.m. Outside his narrow window, Texas life continues. Highway traffic in the distance. Guards changing shifts. Administrative staff processing paperwork for tomorrow's inmates, men who'll wake up Thursday morning while Stephen Nelson never wakes again. 7 hours and 29 minutes remain. The question that brought him here, guilty or innocent of murdering Pastor Clint Dobson, will die with him tonight. Unless something unprecedented happens in the next 449 minutes. But in Texas, unprecedented rarely occurs on execution day. 2:00 p.m. sharp. The visitation room at Polunsky Unit fills with the weight of final goodbyes. Fluorescent lighting casts harsh shadows across scratched plastic tables and metal chairs bolted to concrete floors. This sterile space has witnessed thousands of last conversations between the condemned and those they leave behind. Today, it witnesses Stephen Nelson's. Helene Noah Du Bois enters carrying a small white dog. Monkey. A Maltese mix whose presence breaks every conventional rule about prison visitation protocols. But execution day carries different rules. Different allowances for the impossible circumstances of saying goodbye forever. When love walks into a room knowing it has 3 hours left, what words become possible? Nelson's hands shake as he reaches toward the plexiglass barrier separating him from his wife. They can't touch. Prison policy remains absolute, even on death day. But Helene holds Monkey up to the glass, and Nelson presses his palm against the clear surface where the dog's paw rests. "Give him a hug for me," Nelson whispers into the phone, connecting them across 6 inches of unbreachable space. Helene's eyes fill with tears she's promised herself she wouldn't shed. Not today. Not in front of him. She married this man in 2019, knowing he lived under a death sentence. Knowing this day would eventually come. But knowing and experiencing remain 2 different countries of pain. "I still believe you," she tells him. "I'll always believe you." Outside the prison walls, protesters gather in growing numbers. Anti-death penalty activists hold vigil signs reading, "Innocent man dies today," and "Texas kills the wrong person." Counter-protesters arrive with photos of Pastor Clint Dobson and signs demanding justice for the victim. The divide reflects the controversy that's haunted Nelson's case for 14 years. Guilt versus innocence. Justice versus mercy. 2 narratives that never found common ground. Inside the visitation room, Nelson's mother sits at a separate table. Betty Nelson, 73 years old, who raised 4 children in Dallas and watched one end up on death row. She grips a tissue box with weathered hands, her voice breaking as she speaks through the prison phone. "You were a good boy, Stephen. You made mistakes, but you weren't no killer." "I know, Mama." God knows. 2.do Final conversations between mothers and sons carry different truths than those spoken in courtrooms. At 2:47 p.m., word arrives from Washington, D.C. The Supreme Court has denied Nelson's final appeal. No last-minute intervention. No stays of execution. The legal system has spoken its final word. Stephen Lawayne Nelson will die tonight. Prison officials deliver the news with professional detachment. Nelson nods once, shows no emotional reaction. He's been expecting this moment for months. Hope died gradually on death row, not suddenly. Chaplain Williams returns for additional spiritual counseling. They discuss forgiveness, not just seeking it but granting it. Nelson speaks about Pastor Dobson's family, expressing remorse for their loss regardless of his claims of innocence. "A good man died that night," Nelson says. "Whether I killed him or not, his family deserves peace." The chaplain reads from Psalms. Verses about walking through valleys of shadows. About fear finding no permanent residence in faithful hearts. Nelson listens quietly, occasionally nodding, occasionally closing his eyes. At 3:30 p.m., his final phone call connects. Nelson's sister in California, crying too hard to form coherent sentences. His nephew, asking questions about innocence that have no satisfactory answers. His childhood friend Marcus, promising to care for Helene after today. The conversations flow like water through cupped hands. Precious. Impossible to hold. 4:15 p.m. brings the final moments with Helene. She's composed herself now, determined to give him strength rather than sorrow. Monkey sleeps in her lap, unaware that his owner will never pet him again. You remember what you promised me, Helene says. Always live for me and enjoy life, Nelson recites. I remember, and remember what I promised you, that you'll find happiness again. Someday. They sit in silence for several minutes, memorizing each other's faces across the plexiglass barrier. 14 years of marriage compressed into these final moments of connection. 4:45 p.m. Visitation ends. Guards escort Nelson back to his cell for final preparations. Behind him, Helene clutches Monkey tighter, watching the man she loves disappear through steel doors for the last time. In 75 minutes, she'll watch him die. The question remains, will she be watching an innocent man's execution or a killer receiving justice? 5:30 p.m. The steel door to Nelson's cell slides open with mechanical finality. 3 corrections officers stand in the narrow corridor, their faces professionally neutral. Behind them, the warden waits with a clipboard containing execution protocols refined through decades of practice. Time to go, Stephen. Nelson rises slowly from his bunk. His legs tremble, whether from physical weakness after 14 years of confinement or emotional collapse in these final moments remains unclear to the witnesses who later described this scene. When a man's legs refuse to carry him to his own death, is that the body's last act of rebellion? The transport begins with practiced efficiency. Handcuffs click around Nelson's wrists. Leg shackles secure his ankles. The belly chain connects both restraints, transforming his final walk into a shuffled procession toward the death chamber. But Nelson's body fails him completely. His knees buckle in the hallway. Guards catch him before he hits the concrete floor. What happens next violates the dignity that execution protocols attempt to preserve. They carry him. 2 officers support his arms. A third steadies his legs. Stephen Lawayne Nelson makes his final journey unable to walk under his own power, dependent on the same system that condemned him to die. The death chamber sits in the Huntsville Unit's administrative building, 50 yards from death row but worlds away from the cells where condemned men spend their final years. White walls. Fluorescent lighting. Medical equipment arranged with hospital precision. The gurney waits in the center of the room. Padded vinyl surface. Leather restraining straps. 4 stands positioned on either side like mechanical sentries. Everything sanitized. Everything ready. If we make death clinical enough, does that make it more humane or simply easier to watch? Medical personnel begin their final preparations at 5:45 p.m. The execution team follows protocols established through 564 previous Texas executions. Insert 4 lines in both arms for redundancy. Check catheter placement. Verify pentobarbital concentrations. Nelson lies strapped to the gurney, staring at the ceiling tiles above. His breathing comes in shallow gasps. 14 years of appeals have led to this sterile room, this medical procedure disguised as justice. Through the witness room window, familiar faces gather. Helene clutches Monkey against her chest, the dog's white fur bright against her black dress. Prison officials separate victim witnesses from defendant witnesses, maintaining division even in death's final moments. Pastor Dobson's family occupies the front row of victim seating. His widow, remarried now but still carrying his name in memory. His parents, aged by 14 years of waiting for this conclusion. Their faces reflect not celebration but weary resignation, justice arriving too late to heal wounds that never properly closed. The warden enters at 5:55 p.m. carrying the signed execution warrant. He reads the legal language that transforms Nelson from living human to condemned man awaiting state-sanctioned death. The words echo in the chamber like a bureaucratic prayer. Stephen Lawayne Nelson, you have been sentenced to death by the state of Texas for the murder of Clint Dobson. Do you have any final words? Nelson turns his head toward the witness window where Helene waits with Monkey. His voice, amplified by the chamber's sound system, carries across years of maintained innocence and into these final seconds of life. The 4 lines fill with clear liquid. Pentobarbital begins its journey toward Nelson's heart. In the witness room, some people pray. Others watch in silence. A few turn away, unable to witness the moment when legal machinery transforms into biological finality. At 6 p.m. exactly, the execution begins. The question that brought Nelson here, guilty or innocent, has 37 minutes left to live. 6:45 p.m. Nelson turns his head toward the witness window. His eyes find Helene in the front row, Monkey cradled in her arms like a final blessing. The microphone amplifies his voice throughout the sterile chamber, carrying words across the divide between living and dying. I will always love you no matter, that our love is uncontrollable, there is no definition and no feeling. I'm thankful and grateful. His voice wavers but doesn't break. 14 years of preparation for this moment. When a man speaks his final words, do they carry more truth than a lifetime of previous statements? Give Monkey a hug for me, he tells Helene through the glass barrier. The small white dog sleeps peacefully in her arms, unaware he's witnessing his owner's last breath. The warden signals to the unseen executioner positioned behind a one-way mirror. At exactly 6 p.m., pentobarbital begins flowing through the 4 lines into Nelson's bloodstream. Clear liquid carrying chemical certainty toward his heart. Nelson's breathing slows. His eyes remain fixed on Helene and Monkey. No dramatic convulsions. No Hollywood death throes. Just the quiet surrender of biological functions shutting down in systematic order. It is what it is, Nelson whispers as consciousness fades. His final words echo in the death chamber. Always live for me and enjoy life. Do dying men speak final truths, or do they simply tell us what we need to hear? 6:47 p.m. His chest stops rising and falling. 6:48 p.m. Medical personnel check for pulse and pupil response. 6:50 p.m. The prison doctor steps forward with his stethoscope and pronounces the words that end 14 years of legal proceedings. I pronounce Stephen Lawayne Nelson deceased at 6:50 p.m. February 5, 2025. The witnesses sit in stunned silence. Some pray quietly. Others weep. Pastor Dobson's family shows no visible emotion. Justice delivered, but satisfaction remains elusive after 14 years of waiting. Helene clutches Monkey tighter as guards escort witnesses from the viewing room. Her husband of 6 years lies dead on the gurney, the question of his guilt dying with him. Outside, protesters disperse into the Texas night. Anti-death penalty activists mourn what they believe was an innocent man's execution. Victim advocates feel justice was finally served for Pastor Dobson. The truth died at 6:50 p.m. Only Stephen Lawayne Nelson knew with absolute certainty whether he killed Clint Dobson on that March night in 2011. That knowledge now rests in whatever comes after the final heartbeat stops. 6:50 p.m. Stephen Lawayne Nelson is pronounced dead. The white sheet covers his face. The gurney rolls away from witness view. 14 years of appeals, protests, and proclaimed innocence end in this sterile chamber with the quiet finality of a stopped heartbeat. Outside the Huntsville unit, supporters weep in the February darkness. Helene emerges from the witness room clutching Monkey, her face a mask of grief and exhaustion. Anti-death penalty activists surround her with embraces and whispered condolences. They killed an innocent man tonight, one protester tells gathered media. This is what injustice looks like. When the state executes a man who claimed innocence until his final breath, who bears the weight of being wrong. Across the parking lot, Pastor Dobson's family issues their prepared statement through a victim advocate. Their words honor Clint's memory while acknowledging the complexity of closure after 14 years. Justice has been served, but our loss remains permanent. We pray for peace for all families affected by this tragedy. The controversy doesn't die with Nelson. Legal experts and journalists continue debating evidence that defense attorneys claim no jury or court ever fully considered. DNA samples allegedly mishandled. Witness identifications potentially flawed. Alternative suspects never properly investigated. Texas Department of Criminal Justice records this as the state's first execution of 2025, the second in the United States this year. 3 more Texas executions are scheduled before summer arrives. But statistics cannot answer the question that haunted Nelson's case from the beginning. Did Texas execute the right man? If doubt exists in capital cases, is certainty of guilt a luxury we can afford when life hangs in the balance? Prison officials begin the administrative aftermath immediately. Nelson's body transported to the state morgue. Personal belongings inventoried for release to family. Cell 12 Building F prepared for its next condemned occupant. The machinery of capital punishment moves forward with bureaucratic efficiency. Forms signed. Reports filed. Case officially closed in state records. Helene returns to her empty apartment with Monkey, now a widow at 34. She carries Nelson's final letters, his wedding ring, and the burden of believing in his innocence when the legal system found him guilty beyond reasonable doubt. The truth died at 6:50 p.m. on February 5, 2025. Whether it died with an innocent man or a convicted killer remains the question that will outlive everyone who witnessed his execution. Some mysteries die with their secrets intact. Stephen Lawayne Nelson died as he lived his final 14 years claiming innocence until his last breath. February 5, 2025. 6:50 p.m. A man's heart stops beating in a Texas death chamber. The question that consumed courtrooms, appeals courts, and sleepless nights dies with him. Did the state execute a killer or an innocent man? The legal system rendered its verdict in 2011. 12 jurors found Nelson guilty beyond reasonable doubt of murdering Pastor Clint Dobson. The evidence seemed compelling. The prosecution's case appeared solid. Justice, they said, demanded death. But doubt lingered like smoke after fire. In a system where human judgment determines who lives and dies, can we ever be absolutely certain we're executing the right person? Pastor Clint Dobson remains the true victim in this story. A 28-year-old man of faith, murdered in his own church while serving others. His family waited 14 years for justice, enduring appeals and legal delays that extended their grief across decades. Nelson's execution brings them closure, but not the healing that time and justice sometimes promise. 3 more Texas executions await in 2025. 3 more condemned men will make their final walks to the same death chamber where Nelson died. Each case carrying its own questions about guilt, innocence, and the weight of irreversible decisions. The machinery of capital punishment moves forward with methodical precision. Cases closed. Justice served. But the questions Nelson's case raises about certainty and capital punishment refuse such simple resolution. When we execute someone whose innocence remains debated, do we serve justice or perpetuate tragedy? Helene sits in her apartment with Monkey, reading Nelson's final letters. She believes in his innocence with the certainty that loving someone provides. The courts believed in his guilt with the certainty that evidence provides. Both cannot be right. Yet both live with their certainty. The truth died at 6:50 p.m. on February 5, 2025. Whether it died with a guilty man receiving justice or an innocent man becoming its victim remains the question that outlasts everyone who witnessed his final moments. Some questions have no answers. Some mysteries die with their secrets intact. Some truths remain buried beneath the weight of legal finality and the irreversible nature of death itself. Stephen Lawayne Nelson is gone. The debate about his guilt or innocence continues. What's your verdict? Did Texas execute a guilty man who finally faced justice for Pastor Clint Dobson's murder? Or did an innocent man die claiming truth that no one believed? The evidence presented at trial convinced 12 jurors. The questions raised by his defense team convinced his supporters. Both sides remain certain of their position 14 years later. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you make of the witness identification? The DNA evidence? The alternative suspects never fully investigated. For more deep dives into controversial death row cases where guilt and innocence blur the lines of justice, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Next week, we examine another Texas execution that divided public opinion, a case where new evidence emerged too late to save a life. These stories matter because they force us to confront uncomfortable questions about finality, certainty, and the weight of irreversible decisions in our justice system. The conversation doesn't end when the execution does. It continues with every viewer who chooses to engage with these complex moral questions. What's your take on Stephen Lawayne Nelson's case? The comments section awaits your verdict.